So one thing I noticed recently is, and something that's kind of like floating around in my head, right? So the job we kind of have, like concept artists or artists in general that work in this industry, right? It's always about like creativity at the push of a button, and whether you want to or not, when you start your day, you kind of have to come up with new ideas, new visuals, or if you like, I don't know, you work in sound design or whatever, right? Like then you come up with new tunes or whatever, right? Um, but so with kind of connecting with some of the recent episodes, kind of the loss of routine and that kind of stuff, and I find myself suddenly not feeling very creative, to be honest. I mean, of course you're not in that state of mind as well, but like I oftentimes have like this kind of break where I don't do any kind of work things like at all for some time, whether it's like a week or a month, right? um, so the very concrete example of like, okay, um, you've been let go, right? And then suddenly your daily rhythm is gone, and then you don't really touch like your computer for a week or for a month because you're in a very bad mood, or you want to kind of take a trip or whatever to refresh your mind, um, and that kind of puts you on a creative break, and you don't have that like 9 to 5. Okay, I need to create visuals anymore, um, and I'm wondering like, is that is that a good thing to like take extended breaks from like the daily kind of creativity grind? Is there something that gets lost if you don't do not keep up, like if you do not keep on flexing your creative muscles? I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? Does that even make sense, right? Um,
Yeah, I think in a certain way. I mean, I think creativity is sort of a little bit overrated as a word. I mean, what really is creativity? Because I think the killer of creativity is actually sitting in front of your computer from 9 to 5. I mean, that to me,
that's true. Yeah, yeah.
because it's a matter of a requirement for you to come up with the goods on demand. So I honestly, for me, I change my schedule up enough where I feel like I'm not tied, just tied. At a certain time, as a certain, in the day, I'm here, I'm doing this. I'm trying to be a little bit more flexible.
Mm,
I'm trying to invite more new experiences. That's the only way I think creativity really happens, is if you're free to experience the world. Because creativity doesn't come just when you're sitting looking at a screen,
right.
to me. And our job is, uh, we have a really interesting job in the case that it's not actually very creative work all the time. A lot of time is technical work, right? I mean, they tell you, hey,
Mm, mm,
here's a
mm.
composition. Here's what you should put in it, and go do it, and maybe come up with you can change it a little bit, but that's kind of what we want, and then you go and do it. Or hey, the design, they give you like 10 different buildings that, or something that it's already pretty much like that's the direction. So a lot of times creativity is not the most sought, like the thing that they want most from you. They just want you to be able to do with the image they have in their mind, right?
Yeah,
Um,
fair enough.
and I feel like that actually kills creativity more than anything, in my
That's a good
opinion.
point.
And
Yeah.
when I get really creative is when I experience things, when I have deep discussions, when I look at concepts I don't ever realize, or I see a new place, or I meet a new person. That's when I really start getting creative and going, wow, you see the world that way? That's cool. Wow, okay. And then I start going and I start drawing, or I go to a cafe and I sit there. I'm in a different environment. Now I feel more creative. Or, like I can remember like last year I was in Hong Kong, and I met some people who were just like they thought completely differently about things. And it kind of blew my mind. And I was like, wow. And then that snowballed into a lot of creativity after that. And it's always from that, but it's never ever from, hey, I got so creative today sitting in front of the computer. Like, that just doesn't happen. And so
That's a good
for
point.
me,
Yeah.
yeah. What
No,
about
that's
you?
very true. I mean, it's very true. I think the way you framed it. Um, and not to, I mean, I don't maybe want to go so far to say like our job. I mean, yes, there's probably more technical like things now to consider when you draw, and um, you're right. Maybe the way to look at it is that like while you're on the job, while you're working, is actually when your like I don't know internal creativity gauge is kind of being continuously drained, right? And then when you actually have a break in between, or when you go on vacation, right? Like it's time to really, or on the weekends even, or when you're not just every time you don't work, it's time to like fill up that creativity gauge again with, like you said, like experiences and things, or even like reading or whatever, right? Or hanging out with people. That's a very good way to look at it. And for me, previous like when I was younger, though, I felt like oh, the way to regain that creativity is actually through doing more work, right? So whenever I wasn't on a job, you have some downtime, or like in the evenings, like you needed to I felt the need to like make like personal work, or just sit in front of the computer as well to create more work. That's kind of what I thought what creativity was about, right? The more you do, the more creative you can be. But maybe, I mean, maybe for some people actually that works. I have no idea, right? But like I would say in a similar way to you, that for me as well, and especially as I get older, like I need to refill that pot of creativity more often, um, and have to seek out new experiences, right? And sometimes it's also like I think learning also really helps with refilling that creativity, and especially learning from different kinds of people and learning different things, right? Um, can also really help getting like new perspectives. And often at times I find myself, even if it's like as little as like watching a tutorial, that um, what I'm most appreciative about, and most looking forward to, is just a different opinion, a different um, way of approaching something, rather than like something very technical, right? um, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
I fully agree with you. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
no, I think you touched into something really good, which is beginner's mind. It's a Japanese concept,
Mm,
basically, and uh, you come from it really learning to open your mind, be open to things, and to be humble, and to come from it from a beginner's point of view. But it's also very awe-inspiring, very wide open, right? When you're learning something new, you're like, you're completely open, and a lot of creative, energy happens that way.
mm,
Um, and I just remember the story of my wife when she was, back in the day, and she would be working on like a VFX job, and she'd come home and she'd want to paint for the next 4 hours at least until she
mm,
dropped into the bed tired. But it's sometimes you just have to exercise that creativity and that need to express yourself, and I think
mm,
that's totally fine. I think whatever you feel, I'm at the point of my life that I think I'm transitioning from, like, okay, this full-time job aspect of it is kind of burning me out, and I kind of want to see how I do in a more artistic environment of just doing expression.
mm.
But when I was younger, a lot of times I just come home and do another 4 hours of my own work,
Right.
because I didn't feel like I expressed myself at work, so I'm going to do it now. A lot of it was to get better,
Mm,
at what I do. Um, but for me, that's not at that point it was creative work, but now I think the 9 to 5 is actually hurting me in terms of creativity because
mm,
it's
mm, mm.
making me feel like, damn, like I feel like I'm just doing things that I'm not exactly maybe wanting to do now. I want to express myself more than I want to just be an extension of someone's wrist. So, there's a difference between now and
You
then, and yeah.
you still want to create something. You still want to make something, though, right? You still feel like you need a
Yeah, I mean,
different way to express yourself, right?
the problem is all I want to do now is express myself.
Okay, yeah.
That's the problem, you know, it is a very interesting conundrum because you know, obviously you have to worry about, well, if you're just expressing yourself, you're essentially a fine artist. And if you're a
Mm,
fine artist, how are you going to make money?
mm,
Because, you know, what we're doing is more design jobs, right? We're
mm,
not
mm.
really concept artists. You know, I think we're more designers,
Yeah, yeah, I would
you know,
agree. Yeah.
be it composition or robots or whatever. You know, you're designing things, designing shots, designing lighting, but it's not really, you're not expressing yourself through it, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I tried to marry those two. Like, I was struggling to marry those two until I realized that, like, it's probably not a good idea to do that, right? To kind of like kill two birds with one stone kind of thing. Like, oh, I that's my job, but I also want to kind of bring something of myself into it. And of course, that's very difficult. Maybe some people can do it, right? And maybe they're revered for it, but I never quite could make that happen. And
Well,
so I'm
yeah.
also I mean, I need to have also some outlet, and I guess for me it's like photography more than anything. um, and I try to approach that part in a very relaxed and a very like open mind kind of way, that I mean, sometimes like I do like to take photos that are very close to the kind of like concepts I create, and sometimes that's I want to kind of do the polar opposite, and I kind of just let myself like be carried along, and kind of let the camera kind of lead the way rather than me like consciously pointing it in a certain direction and see what happens, right? Um, and that's been fun, but like really approaching that without like any kind of um, like second thoughts
Mhm.
in the back of my head of like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to make this into any sort of like job situation, right? It should purely be for me and for nobody else. And that's really been, I think, helping to just kind of balance things out. And other than that, though, I kind of, whatever gives me creativity, I think, or whatever helps me with that is just doing things that are completely disconnected from my job, right? And the job is a job at this point, and whatever else I do has to be completely disconnected, has to be something completely different, um, and that really helps, right?
Yeah, you know, it reminds me of, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I think
Mm,
that's, yeah, that's great. I just reminded myself of, you know, I was in a job a couple months ago, and you know, I was, you know, I do a lot of clay sculpts now, and you know, I thought, oh, maybe, you know, do that for money, you know, like how would that be, you know? And I found out really quickly that I actually don't want to do that because, you know, like the person I was working with then said, "Hey, yeah, you do sculpture? Okay, well, you know, maybe we'll have you make this sculpt of this thing." And I was like, "Oh my
mm.
God, that was the last thing I wanted to do was to make a
Oh,
sculpt of
interesting.
someone else's design for work." I'm like, "No freaking way!" And I realized at that moment that, you know, getting paid for it is great, but it has to be on my terms. Otherwise, it
Mm.
just completely kills sculpting for me now, because
Ah, interesting.
that was just
That's
a
a good point.
job, now I have to perform, and now you got to give me feedback, like, no, 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 make that smaller, make that bigger, do this, do that, and
Yeah,
now I'm
defeats the
right back
purpose.
to the whole, like, I got to do what you want. Like, the whole
Mm,
point of sculpting is to do what I want, you
mm,
know. So, you know, sometimes what you love has to stay that way, you know, and your
mm,
job is your job. And the only way they become one thing, I think, is when you get so sure about what you do at your expression that people just want that. And that happens, but not many people can do that.
yeah,
Because I'm a good example of, for the biggest part of my career, I was just a people pleaser, right? I just, okay, what
yeah,
do you want, director? I give you everything. I give you everything. I give you everything. But, you know, always on these jobs, there are these people that get hired for exactly what they do. You know, they're like, okay, you go paint your images the way you paint because I like that. And they don't get much feedback. They just go, just paint it. And then once they paint it, they're done. You know, that's it. That's
Mm.
their part of the show. And that's more true to them, right? So for me, you know, like I just don't want, I feel like, you know, be careful, you know, when you put something you love into the work environment and you start getting, you know, you could get burned out and you can start not loving that thing very quickly. You're like, oh, damn, I don't even want to
Mm.
look at that anymore, you know? So it's just something
Yeah,
you
that's
have to be
true.
aware of that I realize, like, I don't want to, so now I don't even tell people I sculpt. Like, I don't
Oh,
say anything
interesting.
because that's just for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
That's private, you know?
Right, right, right. Oh, that's a
I
good
don't know if it
point. I
has
mean,
any bearing, but
no, no. I think it has a lot to do with it. I mean, I don't know. Like, isn't that that old saying that I don't know, make your hobby into your job, and you never have to work a day in your life, or something like that, or something along those lines. But I would just say at this point, like, be very careful if you want to take a hobby and make it into your job, because yeah, there's a lot of things you haven't considered, whether it's like painting or writing or sculpting or anything really, right? I mean, um, like having ideas for, like, I don't know, filmmaking and short films is one thing, but like becoming a full-time filmmaker is a wholly different ball game, I think. And I think that
yeah,
holds true for pretty much
yeah,
everything, right? I mean, if it's on your own terms, like maybe it's a little bit better, but I think even fine artists like live with a lot of pressure, and maybe for them it's even more difficult. I mean, I wouldn't know, right, because I'm not a fine artist, but like having like being in that world also, I think is not easy at all. And more
oh,
often than not, I think, because their images, or whatever it is, their sculptures are so tightly kind of connected to who they are, that any kind of any kind of public discourse about them like hits them all the more harder, I think. um, because you can't, like, I mean, for us, like, we can always hide whenever it's convenient behind like the director or behind the production designer to say like, oh well, I just did a design early on and then everything changed, so it's not my fault, kind of thing. But then if your name's on it, and nobody else's, and people are ripping that piece of art apart publicly, like, that really is something entirely different, right? But I mean, that's a whole different
yeah.
story, I
I mean,
think.
there's a lot in there, and I
Mm.
think, you know, this is just to say, be careful how you drag, you know,
Mm.
your form of expression into a work situation, because you may not want to do that. And
Mm.
I'm just giving
Yes.
the sculpture as an example of,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm never
Good
doing
point.
that again, because it would just kill my love for it, because I'd be like,
Yeah, yeah,
now I
yeah.
look at the
That's a
sculpt,
very
I'm like,
good point.
oh man, you know, anytime I touch clay, I want it to feel like I'm expressing myself in an art form that feels good to me. But you know, if I make sculptures and then people go, well, I want to buy one, okay, that's a different story, because they're just buying something I'm creating, and
Mm.
that's okay. But the thing is, then, you know, you got the next thing. If you're counting on your living by selling paintings or sculptures, and you're like, well, why is no one buying it? Or, you know, then
Mm.
you start worrying about, you know, oh, now I got to go galleries, and there's a lot of, every field has its issues.
Mm. Mm.
But I
Definitely.
think I want to make sure that when it comes to these my regular job, that I am clear about what I'm giving them, and then they're clear about what they're getting, and that's it. And I
Mm.
work my hours, and I give you the best I have.
Mm.
Um, and then after that, hopefully, I have enough energy to work on some of my own things, and that's what keeps me going for now.
Mm.
So
That's good. That's great. No, that's it's a very, very good thing, a very good thought to kind of close this out. I think we kind of started off with a little bit about like taking breaks from creativity, and kind of landed here, which I love. Um, but yeah, I think that was a fun little episode. Um, that's it for today. Thanks for listening again. Thank you again for listening and watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe.